In this Psyche video, I'm going to bring on a guest speaker, the late great Manly P. Hall. I was listening to some of his material over the past few days, refreshing my memory, when I heard a certain segment that pretty much clicked in my head, and I'm going to share it with you because what he says during these next 10 minutes is pretty much exactly what I've been saying for the past few years about the psychology, about the now space, about sensation, about being the port authority of your port of sensation, how you're formulating knowledge and shipping them out. And he also brings some other things into it, such as stress and anxiety and things like that. But the main point is, he brings into the conversation the now space. And I'm going to put a quote up from his book, Secret Teachings of All Ages. And I'm going to put it on the screen as you listen to what he's saying and also watch the visuals. Hopefully, to help the new viewer, the individual who's new to correct sentence structure, communication, parse, syntax, grammar, as well as perhaps the intermediate or even advanced student who is still having a little bit of trouble grasping this concept of the now space, which a more correct term with my position would be the continuum. Hope you enjoy this edition of Psyche. Let me know what you think in the comments.
But all these situations arise within our own consciousness. And the world around us, before it can reach us, must pass through the censorship of our own mental and emotional natures. And here is where the trouble begins. The trouble begins where man begins to interpret, in terms of his own nature, things that have an existence apart from himself. He takes the world condition and interprets it in terms of his own ignorance. He uses whatever attitudes and prejudices he is familiar with. And by the time he gets through interpreting events, he can frighten himself to death with them. Another person with a different attitude, interpreting the same events, comes up with an entirely different conclusion. Thus, one of the difficulties in our peace of mind is that the sensory messages which reach us from the outer world cannot and are not honestly received. They cannot be merely registered and factually examined. They must pass through the involved and complicated psychic organism which we have built. The individual is not neutral in anything. He is not able merely to accept a fact, register that fact, and live according to it. The moment he gets into the presence of a fact, he begins to interpret the fact out of the fact. He begins to impose upon this fact all forms of modifying opinions of his own. He cannot merely accept an event. He cannot say, this is what has happened. This is the way I will react to it. Long before he can come to these rather simple conclusions, he has distorted the event out of all proportion. He has tried to fit it into patterns of his own experience which may be inadequate, probably are. And he is taking it always for granted that the future must be identical with the past, and whatever has been a general acceptance must continue to be. Thus he locks himself, and what could be an experience becomes a problem. What could be a challenge becomes a catastrophe. To meet this kind of a situation means more or less a re-evaluation of our approach to a great many of our essential responsibilities. And I like sometimes to think of the way in which the old Zen masters of Japan attempted to explain and interpret many of these interesting problems. The first problem that the individual has to decide, according to the old Zen concept, is whether or not the individual is going to be alive or whether the problems are going to be alive. Where is the center of consciousness going to be? Is it going to be in the center of us, or is it going to be drowned in the difficulties? If it is in the center of us, we can control any difficulty. If we lose this center, we are gradually going to tangle ourselves into a confusion for which perhaps we can find no solution. In the terms of time, the center for ourselves is now. Now is the only moment which is essentially and inevitably real. It is also the only moment that is under our control. It is under our control for the instant of its own existence. And what we call time is an endless progression of instants, now. It is now continuing. And adjustment is the individual's sense of consciousness forever functioning in the immediate now. 5 minutes ago was now. 5 minutes passed. It is no longer now. Now has moved, like consciousness, from one time pattern to another. And by virtue of this motion, time now has left things behind. Even while we are speaking, an instant has gone into eternity. If at any point in the individual's existence he ties himself to this time, to this instant, then he is lost, because he goes into eternity with it. But if he can move from one instant to another, retaining always the immediate fact of now, he is in a peculiarly rich situation. You remember in the pact in Faust, where Faust and Mephisto discuss how the famous pact is going to be paid off in the end. And Faust makes a kind of an agreement, an arrangement that he considers suitable to his own need. And he says, if ever to the passing hour I say, O stay, thou art so fair, then unto thee I give the power to drag me down to hell's despair. Then may my fate no longer linger. Then from my service thou art free. Fall from the clock the index finger. Be time all over then for me. In other words, the moment the individual attaches himself to a unit of time, he passes into limbo with it. Thus, in Zen, the great problem is to preserve eternal immediacy. The kind of now which is forever freedom. For now you can do anything you want. But the moment now becomes past, you can only do whatever you can do. Once a thing is done, it may never be possible to undo it. Nor do we gain any wealth of understanding by vague hoping that the future is the time for doing. The individual who ties himself to the past is lost. the individual who awaits forever the future, like old Wilkins Macabre in Dickens, waiting for something to turn up, is also lost. The actual immediacy is now. The use of now determines all things. The only value that the past has is that it equips us to use the now. The only value the future has is that it is the extension of the now and presents now to us as infinite opportunity, a foreverness of now. In this now, therefore, the Zen master says, we have freedom. We have no freedom except the freedom of this decision, this conclusion, this attitude, spontaneously taken at this moment. Now we can dedicate ourselves to various purposes that we regard as important. Now we can accept the burden of our life with complete personal privilege of decision. Now we can face facts without burdening them with our own old fears or morbid anticipations. Now, therefore, is a strangely strong point of decision. It is a clean-cut instant. But man, unless he understands it, refuses to accept it as such. He shifts immediately to the future or to the past, simply to evade the responsibility of decision. So lack of serenity arises, in part at least, from man's continuous effort to evade the need for immediate decision. The individual who is afraid to face a fact sets in motion patterns of evasion which must inevitably add to confusion. He therefore loses the power of immediate adjustment, and he may well confuse the lives of others around him by this strange inability to decide or to determine the course of action.